The Stanley Cup playoffs bracket is a place where everything you thought you knew about the NHL goes to die a miserable, godless death. Nobody can realistically predict what happens, to what degree, with what caveats, and in what ways. Nobody. It is the great equalizer. The only constant is that you have a 1 in 16 chance of winning it all. No more, no less. That makes things incredibly stressful. Every little play. If you held a gun to my head, which my head and I hope you never do, and forced me to pick a team to win the Cup, I would say the Hurricanes. I think the Hurricanes are the team most likely to emerge victorious from that untempered, seldom understood corner of reality, which renders every game before it moot. But guess what we're doing today? We're tempering it. We're trying to understand it. It's a fool's errand, but I am a fool. Because to ease that stressful uncertainty of not knowing, to try and exercise some control over an unknowable future, today we are going to try and see if there is some way, some pattern, some statistics in the regular season that all prior Stanley Cup champions have that we can use to predict who wins the Stanley Cup before the playoffs have even begun. Somewhere in those mountains of score sheets and standings and play trackers, I know in my very bones that there is an equation, a pattern, a symbol that invariably reveals who the eventual Stanley Cup winner will be. We have to find it to save us all the stress in the downtime between playoff games where we're so sure we're going to pull it off or absolutely certain that we're doomed. Once we find this pattern, we can jettison that stress forever because we know who will win. Pull up your socks and make sure you've got some water. We're going deep into the rabbit hole. Since the league has more or less been in its current iteration since 2005, that's the time frame we're going to be looking at, specifically the 17 years since cool and nerdy stats have been tracked in the NHL. This gives us a lot of different ways, in a pretty decent sample size, to ease the uncertainty of chaos that inevitably unfolds in the postseason. And since statistical averages vary across seasons, I'll be mitigating that somewhat by looking at team rankings in each of those stats, which provides a little more context for them within that year. Let's start off with something simple, like goals. Do the Stanley Cup champions of the last 17 years all have something in common with each other when it comes to regular season goals? Well, at 5-on-5, the last 17 Cup champions were pretty solid goal scorers, unless you count the Kings and the Panthers. Outside of those three, and Chicago in 2015 and St. Louis in 2019, the eventual Cup champions were all top third in goal scoring. But is that really saying much? 16 teams make the playoffs anyway. All that being in the top 11 indicates is that these teams scored enough goals to make the playoffs, comfortably. And 5 of these 17 were all over the map in goals for, so it's a wash. But that's okay. We were never trying to find a gold vein on our first day. Let's move on to goals against. Okay, this one's a little more tidy. Over half of Cup champions were in the top 10 of goals against at 5-on-5, but all but one are in the top 16. Again, all that really indicates is that these teams had a good defense, or good goaltending, which you'd expect from playoff teams. So we'll pass on that one too. There's one more way we can look at goals, and that's if we smack those for and against into one stat, the 5v5 goal differential. Now we're cooking. Every Stanley Cup champion is in the top third in goal differential. Oh, nope. I take it back. The 2012 Kings were only 15th in 5-on-5 goal differential. Dag nabbit. If every eventual champion had 66th percentile differentials, I think we can say there is a 16 and 17 chance that if you had a top 11 5v5 goal differential, you are qualified to win the Cup. Logic is wonderful, especially when you misuse it. Now, you may be thinking, well, duh, good scoring differential means you'll probably succeed in the playoffs. And you'd be right. So let's get a little gooey with the numbers, a little bit more intentional and in-depth. Let's look at play driving, specifically expected goals. These aren't actually goals, but they are scoring chances and shots that take into account how likely they would be to become goals. In other words, on balance, they generally tell you how dangerous of a team you are. Generally. It's not perfect, but it gives more context than just plain old goals or shots do. If you maintain an expected goals for percentage of around 50% for the year, you're an average team. Anything about 3% either way is really good or really bad. Most Stanley Cup champions were, mostly pretty good, I guess? But then some of them were okay, and the 2018 Capitals were not okay. That's the quality of offense generated. Let's see what they allowed. Oh my god, the difference is even more stark. There are a lot of sevenths in there, a few eighths. like that piano exercise for 5-year-olds where you try to play as wide of a dyad as you can. But this harmonic graph is also populated with ass clowns like the 2015 Hawks, the 2017 Penguins, and oh look, the 2018 Capitals again. So you don't have to generate elite or even good offense in the regular season to necessarily be a cup champion, but neither do you have to be good at suppressing opponent play. If you're the 2018 Capitals, you can suck at both, as the expected goals for percentage chart shows. But even despite the rankings settling, those pesky outliers still pockmark the graph. The Capitals and 2011 Bruins prove that you don't have to drive play in the regular season to turn it on in the postseason, which for the purposes of this video is terrifically upsetting. But in general, champions have been in the top 10 of 5v5 expected goals for, which makes sense, but neither is that particularly revelatory, especially when you consider the outliers. Okay, so still nothing of consequence. What about driving play on the whole, as in shot attempts? That's looking at the same phenomena in a different way. Maybe there's a stronger correlation there. Well, crap. The number 1 overall team won 3 times, and second won 4 times, but after that, there are some pretty big gaps. Okay, so I think this is as good a time as any to explain why I think the Hurricanes are the most likely to walk away champions of Lord Stanley. Put simply, they are the best team in the league this year in terms of play driving, no question. Seriously, there's an entire Oort cloud between them and everybody else. But Pinholes, I hear you screech as your body contorts in gremlinatic rage. I thought you just said the best teams don't often win. And that's true. However, Carolina isn't just the best team this year. They're the best team this decade. Carolina shoots from absolutely everywhere. For nearly the past 8 years, the Carolina Hurricanes have consistently been near the top of the pack in both expected goals for percentage and Corsi percentage at evens during the regular season. Plenty of teams are good at one intermittently. Very few are that high in one consistently. No other team ranks so highly in both nearly as often as Carolina. They have a fair bit of playoff success to show for it, but nothing really substantial. A few 8-win postseasons. But that's further than 12 other playoff teams got. Now, Carolina hasn't won the Cup in almost 20 years. It isn't any one of these franchises in these graphs. Most of these franchises are teams who are in and out of the top of the regular season charts frequently, and often, though not always, went all the way in a season when they were near the top. So, for a team to consistently be at the top, year over year, you have to think something's got to give at some point. They're not going to stop shooting, so maybe their voluminous medium and low danger chances start to go in. Maybe their goalie becomes a brick wall. Maybe they just get whatever tiny bit of puck luck is needed for a team so dominant to succeed. I don't know. But this team puts everything on net and wins through what is simply a numbers game, and is through a similar numbers game that I believe they'll win it all sometime soon. Anyway, regardless of which play driving stat you look at, there's really not too much of a correlation. Only the milquetoast politically correct half conclusion that generally champions come from teams that are pretty good at one thing or another. Unless you're the 2018 Capitals. Then you take that brand new season spiel to heart. So, goals and expected goals, the Excaliburs, MacGuffins, and Rosebuds that rewrite the face of the almighty scoreboard, have the most uninspiring correlation to actual championhood. The hunt for the secret sauce continues. So let's divorce ourselves from goals and focus on something a little more hocus pocus. After all, maybe there's a pattern that lies in something more innocuous, or something more fluid. Something like PDO. PDO is the sum of your shooting percentage and your save percentage. And since save percentage can be a little volatile and shooting percentage can be a little more volatile, it's thought of as either a completely worthless stat or a stat that uncovers which teams are frauds, riding a high shooting percentage or save percentage. Now, this is a topical point because the top 2 teams in the standings, the Capitals and the Jets, have been accused of having a PD odor about them. In the Capitals, it's the case of an otherworldly shooting percentage, and in the case of the Jets, it's both save and shooting percentage. The belief that teams with a high regular season PDO are frauds and don't become champions, does history bear that out? In the first half of our Hall of Winners, no. Kinda. In the first 9 years since 2008, we've got 3 in the top 3, 4 in the middle third, and 2 in the bottom 3. Splitting those PDO scores up into their shooting and saving add-ins, there still isn't much correlation. Teams were good at one and bad at the other, with only Boston in 2011 and Chicago in 2013 having both add-ins within the top 10. So that's underwhelming. Maybe the second half of these most recent champions will have a discernible pattern. Well, kinda. There's a prevalence of stronger 5-on-5 save percentage, mostly within the top 10, and if you look at all of the 17 champs in question, all but one are inside the top 12. But again, 16 teams make the playoffs. 12th in the playoffs, which the 2021 Lightning ranked as in all three, is theoretically 4th worst. So basically all that's saying is you at least have to have goaltending good enough to get you in the playoffs. And shooting percentage is all over the place. And while we're on the topic of PDO as a stat that shows you who's a percentage fraud and who's an actual contender, let's look at how the best PDO teams in the regular season did against how their PDO fared in the playoffs. On the whole, the depth of their playoff runs was patternless. Yippee. They were eliminated in each round about as often as any team gets eliminated in each round. There are a few interesting outliers. Pittsburgh in 08 lost in the finals with their second best shooting percentage, barely having a hiccup in the playoffs. And Boston led the league in PDO 6 times, thus proving that Boston is the luckiest sports city in the world, and got a finals appearance out of it with 1 win. Speaking of champions, the PDO volatility never really comes for them. By and large, they just maintain their same percentages as the playoffs went on. So maybe you don't have to have a great PDO to win at all. You just need to have a consistent one. But all things considered, I think the PDO correlation to championhood is, weak. With all these weak correlations, I'm starting to think that maybe we're looking at this all wrong. We've covered goals, the thing you win with, expected goals, the thing you're expected to win with, and PDO, which is nothing. But we've only looked at them in the lens of even strength. For champions, maybe it takes things that are more out of the ordinary to secure a championship. So let's look at special teams. A successful special teams unit on either side of the puck is something we hear a lot about when it comes to playoff teams having an X factor. With all that hype, there's probably some kind of correlation. Surely, I am on my way to an insane asylum. Let's make this quick. You already see what I see. Regular season power plays that are all over the map. You might as well not even look at power play percentage in the regular season. Just throw it out. Penalty kill, on the other hand, that's a man-down position. That's a situation that puts a lot more pressure on you, and champions of the past, by and large, have done a better job of killing than converting in the regular season. As for how much these two vary when it comes to the playoffs, well, you don't really need to carry either of them over. Champions have seen them get better, get worse, or stay significantly the same. So, once again, there's not much there, aside from the flimsy and flamsy wet bread assertion that your regular season penalty kill will probably need to be above average. Whoop-dee-doo. Okay, so I apologize for dragging you fine fellows and ladies out of the comfortability of even strength and into special teams. That was unbecoming of me, and I'm sorry. Let's look at something even more outlandish. The team's record in the final 10 games of the season. This is quite outlandish. Oh, I'm so bad. However, it won't be outlandish in the end if we can prove there's a pattern somewhere. Literally, we only need to find that clear pattern once. Because that's all it takes to prove causation, right? So here we go. Going into the playoffs hot is an NHLism that's almost as old as the handshake line or telling a gentleman on the other team that he fillets people. Does it really end up mattering to the eventual cup winners? Well, right from the get-go, we see Detroit, Pittsburgh, Chicago, and Boston all managing to stay well above 500. Then it gets a little wacky the next half-decade. The Kings went exactly 500 in both their championship years, and Chicago and Pittsburgh went above in one year and below in another. Dang, that pattern held some promise too. That really sucks. It does sort of make a comeback in the final bunch of years, with most champs having 6 or 8 wins in their last 10, but there are a few 3 and 4 win clunkers in there that blemish the lot. Streaks to end the year are also all over the place, so there's not much we can do there. However, ending the regular season hot is not necessarily all about the final record. After all, you can be playing really well and still lose. Let's see what happens when we just look at how hot a team is in terms of driving play. Aha! Finally, we have a correlation that is not completely meh. Almost every champion finished their last 10 games of the regular season driving play well above average, both in terms of expected goals and scoring chances. The only 2 teams that were underwater in both were Pittsburgh in 2017 and Washington in 2018. But I think I speak for both franchises when I say those cups were utterly shocking to have won, for various reasons. Anywho, here's our pattern for entering the playoffs hot. It's not a rule, which is what I was hoping for, but it's close to a trend. Let's see if we can get something a little more concrete. You know something that's concrete? Something that's so simple it's almost stupid? One number. A good old-fashioned ranking. A seeding. Every team only has one place in the standings, be it in the league, their conference, or their division. Has each Stanley Cup winner finished in a seed in any of those three consistently enough for it to be a pattern? So close, but no. Unsurprisingly, we have a lot of teams here who finished top 10 in the league, in other words, good teams. Teams who finished in the top third in their conference, in other words, good teams. And teams who finished first through third in their division. In other words, you get the idea. But there was almost one of those crazy patterns, one of those methods to the madness that defined every Stanley Cup champion. Do you see it? I wouldn't blame you if you didn't, because it is very stupid. Basically, every champion of the last 10 years has had the sum of the conference rank and their division rank be either 2 or 4, with the exception of the 2021 Lightning when the league was using a different division structure altogether. It's a pattern. Hey, I never said it had to make sense. It just had to be there. Like a supermassive element that exists for a billionth of a second, costs $200 million to discover, and is named Johnsonium. It don't have to make sense. There's another psycho pattern in there too. The vast majority of champions had their conference and division seed be both odd or both even numbers. That's what winning the cup is all about, really. Pulling out silly little coincidences like that. I mean, if you can pull off a third place conference seed and a first place division rank, then you're basically a lock for Lord Stanley. But I joke. There's no real pattern here, once again, aside from generally, the Stanley Cup champions were pretty good regular season teams. Big if true. Well, just like my sales job, just gotta be water off a duck's back. On to the next one. It is a bit more niche, but there is a thought that in the current divisional playoff format, being a good team in a weaker division is like a laxative straight to the third round, and a 25% chance of coming home with the goods, since you're essentially guaranteed playing members of your own division in the first 2 rounds. Ladies and gentlemen, does that assumption hold up? You already know that it doesn't. I took the point averages of every division from every year of the NHL in its current playoff format, and found that the champions never, ever have come from the weakest division. Only once did they come from the second weakest division. Twice, they came from the second best division. 7 times, they came from the best division in the league. Another way of looking at it is that in every full season, there was never a champions division in which there were more than 2 teams that weren't within spitting distance of the playoffs. If we contextualize this a little bit more, we see a slightly more watertight pattern. The champion team in all but one case came from the stronger of the 2 divisions in their conference. Now, why is this? Why do the most or second most difficult divisions usually see the Cup won, and why from the more difficult division in their conference? Who cares? It's a pattern. Yay! Like I've said, ours is not to question why, ours is but to identify and die. So even though it's not a 100% pattern, it is basically as close as it's going to get. At this point, I will take any statistical scraps I can get my grubby little protuberances on. Let's bring it home. We still have one more champions trend to look at, just for good measure. Believe it or not, there is a pattern to this as well. It essentially goes like this. No green. Sorry, Dallas and Minnie. A bit more specifically, the champions have all had either a grayscale color or blue somewhere in their color scheme. That's the pattern, and it applies to, like, almost every team in the NHL. You could also say that a team primarily sporting a shade of red wins twice every 5 years, but that's not a single-year prediction. Okay, I'm ready to call it quits at this point. We've burned through so many stats now that I've been reduced to a slobbering mass of jelly looking at jersey colors. That's not a stat, that's just a thing. Actually, maybe because the NHL playoffs are so random and chaotic, maybe we need to look into something senseless to find a pattern. After all, we're applying a fallacious but logical analysis to an illogical tournament. Maybe we should fight fire with fire. Maybe we should avoid looking at hard stats and just look at things. And folks, I looked at everything. First up, how did the champions do in their prior season? Oh look, there's no pattern whatsoever. I started looking at the goal scoring ranks of every player on the team. No pattern there, I don't even know what I was looking for. Did the champs have a former player from the prior champs franchise? Almost, but not enough for it to be anything significant. I looked to see if there was any consistency in point per game players. Of course there wasn't. I looked at the number of 50 to 59 point getters for some reason. I should have taken that as a sign of my need for treatment. I dropped further down the rabbit hole into the number of January to June birthdays and found nothing, giving up halfway through. I looked to see if the number 16, which is the number of playoff wins you need to win the Stanley Cup, was absent from the stat sheet, as if the team was saving it for the playoffs or something. I got as far back as Vegas 2 years ago. I looked to see if there was any game number in the season that the champs always either won or lost. Game 46 came close, but the Kings and Penguins ruined it like they always do. It got to a point where I looked at the player on each team who scored the number of points closest to the number of the team captain. I don't even know what I'm thinking here. Maybe a ratio or something? I have to find something. I have to know how to find the cup winner so that I don't have to fly in the dark during the playoffs. But then, something occurred to me. At first, it was just a little riff off the identity of the captains of each team. A leader who bears the brunt of criticism when things go wrong. The guy who everyone looks up to. And there is a pattern. Something that's as close to a rule as you're going to find. And it's very, very stupid. All of the captains have O's in their last name. Ovechkin, Pietrangelo, Stamkos, Landeskog, Barkov, Crosby, Toes. Char's the only exception, but he's got a big fat O at the end of his first name, and it even sounds like an O, so he counts. This is the requirement for winning the Stanley Cup in the advanced stat era. If the hereditary name of your team's captain lacks that annular glyph of the close mid-back rounded vowel, you're golfing. So, with all these foolproof conclusions and logically sound rules, which teams in the 2025 playoffs do these apply to? Let's go through the list. 1. Champions have almost always been top third in 5v5 goal differential. These are those teams this year. 2. Champions have almost always been above water in shot attempts percentage and expected goals percentage across the last 10 games of their season. That is true of these teams this year. Less often, but commonly. 3. Their conference and division seeds have been either both even or both odd. That's these teams. 4. They have almost always come out of the better division in their conference. That's these teams. And 5. Lastly, their captain must have an O in his last name, or at least as the last letter of his first name. And finally, if they wear green, then you're sorry. No. So, after sifting through all these remaining teams, the one squad that passes all of these criteria is none other than this one. This is the team that will somehow win the Stanley Cup, led by their captain with an O-full name out of a better division, with an even or odd ranking, and off the back of ending the season strong. Disclaimer, I'm writing these words on April 12th. The season is not actually over yet, so I don't actually know which team is showing up here. I hope it's nothing embarrassing. I want to leave you all with one last, somewhat serious point. If you take all the percentages that I base these BS rules off of, and multiply the chances of them all applying to one team in any year, you get almost exactly a coin flip. You can find the most obscure, concealed, brain-dead patterns that unearth what somehow makes a Stanley Cup winning team. You can find the golden formula, you can look truth dead in the eye, and you are still utterly powerless before the Stanley Cup playoffs. The regular season, quite literally, means nothing. It's something I've been trying to tell you the whole video, because there are 16 teams in the playoffs. 15 of them are going to go home with nothing. What are the chances that that one team is the best regular season team? Or the second best? Or the third best? Or the 16th best? It's not that the number 1 team is cursed or the number 16 team is cursed. It's that number 1 and 16 are only one of 16. So here's my advice. If your team's not on tonight, relax. Don't worry about how the series is going, or how they'll have to improve here or there if they face this or that team, or what their historical record against them is, or anything like that. Statistics matter in the grand scheme of things. But in the Stanley Cup playoffs, they only need to be irrelevant once for it to make all the difference. Very special, sincere thank you to every single one of my patrons, especially Sean, Eric Sheldon, Ballin' Kitten 43, Ethan Johnson, Infernos Gaming, It's Me Kowalski, Jules, Len Nicolosi, Pierre O'Connor, Pylon Zin, Shamu! I don't know why I did that, and Stuck Mode.